Okay. All right. So this is YouTube video number 2, and for the time being, the production quality of this video and probably a lot of videos to come is going to be pretty shite because how I'm approaching this is to not really go for perfection, but rather to um, get into the habit of making these videos. Um, for this reason, what I see is that right now, and I think this is pretty self-evident. I mean, I don't think I'm like a visionary for thinking about this or remarking on this. Is there are really 3 areas, general ideas, uh, where progress has to be made to prevent the worst effects of global warming from ever happening, right? And so when I say worst effects, I think it's and this is the way the human mind is conditioned, or how we've kind of evolved. It is extremely easy to underestimate just how significantly our world, our day to day lives, our prospects of life, our economic security will be impacted by the changing climate in the next 5, 10, 15 years through the end of the century. Um, but coming back to that, so those 3 areas where progress needs to be made are: one, technology, right? Um, we see electric vehicles, we see improving solar cells, we see all kinds of different technologies being rolled out and rapidly, in some cases, improved to provide alternatives to um, fossil fuel burning technologies, like you know a gas powered car, for example, or a coal fired power plant, or a natural gas power plant. That's tech. Number 2 is implementation. So, and this one is kind of oft overlooked, but just because a technology exists, right? So, there's super high performance solar panels in laboratories all around the world, right? There is a difference between the technology existing and that technology being implemented at a scale that makes a difference. Um, and everything that takes a technology from here and gets it to here is economics. And people and businesses actually, putting in the time, the investment, the work, the planning to make that happen. So that's, say, for example, installing hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of solar cells in the next few years. That is setting up EV charging stations. Um, that is increasing the use of public transportation. That is powering down, um, you know, uh, coal-fired power plants or natural gas plants, and powering up renewable energy sources arrays. Um, yeah, and then the last is information, and this is really my whole purpose behind making these videos, is that there is a shift which is already occurring, has already gotten started, but needs to be accelerated, which is human beings coming to prioritize or emphasize their carbon footprint. And in order for people to give a shit about how much they pollute or how much carbon goes into the atmosphere, which right now, I will say right now, I still drive a Toyota 4Runner and it gets like 16 mpg. And like I'm not very good at keeping the tires aired up, or at least not as good as I should be. So like um, that reduces the fuel efficiency of it. So I am not, there's no high horse that I'm sitting on. I am, kind of bad at this stuff too. But what is needed is that there needs to be a tremendous amount of dispersal of like the right information, like when you drive your car around, or the energy station that's giving you the energy that's powering your home that is running, which is all the time in most cases. Um, that is putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and carbon dioxide is a pollutant, frankly. And what that does is it acts as an insulator which traps heat on the face of the planet, and that heat changes weather and disrupts ecosystems and all that other stuff, which I'll probably get into in subsequent videos if needed. So the first part of that is, dispersing information. And the second that I've come to appreciate tremendously in the last several months is fortifying the emotional will to tackle this issue. What I see by and large is, and I've experienced this too, is we want to, as human beings, we want to ignore the severity of this problem simply because it is so massive in scope, right? It's super difficult to think about what our lives are going to be like um, in 10 to 15 years with a warmer planet with higher sea levels. And it's scary to do so. So then people tend to vacillate from not wanting to think about it to thinking about it and being completely immobilized by depression or just, apprehensive to act or think that they can actually make a difference. And that's dangerous. That's the thing that I'm interested in fixing in any small way that I can, um, is anything is impossible until it is done. Presently, we don't really have an option, right? If we don't start working on this, as difficult as the greenhouse gas emissions problem is, if we don't start working on it, we're fucked. And some would argue that we're fucked anyway. There's already some momentum to climate change, which is unavoidable. We already see this. Um, for example, here in New Orleans, where I live, we had we had tornadoes in March. Never seen that before in my life. And of course, you can't say that like individual weather events are indicative of like overall climate trends. That's true. But in general, on average, um, we already see really dramatic changes to our weather patterns. Um, Greater frequency of heat waves, of wildfires, of flooding events, of extreme rainstorms, of extreme wind events, tornadoes. Um, and that will actually continue to accelerate over time. Um, but the difference between the future that we're headed towards, if we act, and if we don't, is massive. And I, for one, and I hope you're with me on this, I believe that this is a future worth fighting for. I believe that fighting for the prospects of life for, I don't have any children, but my nieces and nephews and cousins, maybe one day I'll have kids, fighting for environmental and therefore economic security for them, to me, is itself intrinsically valuable. And we find, or what's ultimately true as human beings is that we love a challenge. We are happiest when we are finding solutions, when we are making a difference. And this is why, to me, the extreme, like literally unprecedented in the whole of human history, difficulty of reaching a carbon sustainable future, or creating a carbon sustainable world economy, is the most motivating thing in the world. This is the challenge of our era. And I think it is a worthwhile one. The last thing I'll add is if we extrapolate out, you know, current human activity to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, we will at some point in the future arrive at a, arrive at this very specific moment where rather than putting more carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere per time, we actually start taking them out. So if you're looking at a curve, it's greenhouse gases increasing, boing, and then they begin to decrease. And that moment, that specific moment, people are starting to refer to as drawdown. And I think perhaps one of the most powerful things that we can do to combat that feeling of overwhelm and helplessness when we think about preventing a climate disaster is to place ourselves right there at that moment. Like, close your eyes, consider what age you're going to be. For me, hopefully, this is what I'm fighting for. I'll be about like 55, 50 years old, something like that. And visualize, maybe you're watching like a television screen and they are reporting on finally having reached drawdown. And I think at that time, like, we as a global community can breathe a collective sigh of relief. Because at that moment, we will have done, we will have reversed a trend that has defined humanity pretty much since we discovered fire and started chopping down trees. We'll have solved the biggest problem facing sustainability, which is how do we move out of the fire age where we have to burn things, wood, fuel, coal, whatever, burn things to power our society. Okay, I'll leave it there today. So we'll see. Hopefully, these get better week over week. They should. Yeah.